Jade had always been the quiet type, the one who kept to herself. That's what she wanted to be, quiet, unnoticed, safe. She had lived too much of her life in turmoil, growing up in an abusive household that never gave her the peace she longed for. The marks on her skin weren't the only scars she carried. Her heart and mind were covered in invisible bruises from years of neglect, harsh words, and cruelty. Moving to a new city, to a new school, was supposed to be her chance to start fresh, to leave her past behind. It wasn't supposed to follow her here. She sat at the back of the classroom, just out of sight, hoping not to draw attention. The hum of chatter around her was nothing but a distant noise. Her fingers gripped the edge of the desk, nails digging into the wood. She tried to keep her head down, eyes glued to her notebook, but it wasn't enough to escape the feeling of being different. She knew what they were thinking, knew the judgment in their eyes, even without seeing it. They saw a girl who didn't belong. A girl who didn't fit in. It was the same everywhere she went. When the bell rang for lunch, Jade slipped through the crowd as quickly as she could, her body moving like a shadow. She passed the groups of laughing, talking students, wondering what it must feel like to have such a carefree existence. To belong. The cafeteria doors loomed ahead, a threshold to a new challenge. She entered, her eyes scanning the room for a place to sit. The tables were filled with groups of kids chatting, eating, and sharing stories. But no one looked at her. No one offered a smile or a seat. She found an empty spot at the far end, away from the others. Jade placed her tray down, her heart pounding in her chest. She tried to eat, tried to force herself to focus on the food in front of her, but her mind kept drifting. The noise of the cafeteria became a blur, and for a moment she was lost in her thoughts, thinking of the life she had left behind. A life she'd never talk about, a life that was too painful to share. And that's when it happened. She hadn't seen them approach, but she felt the change in the air. A coldness, a heaviness. Carla's laugh echoed across the room, sharp and cutting, and Jade's stomach dropped. It was followed by the sound of footsteps that weren't casual, weren't just walking. They were approaching her. "Look at this," Carla's voice rang out, mocking, as if she had been waiting for this moment all along. "Another quiet freak, who thinks she can just blend in." Jade didn't lift her head, didn't look up. She could feel their eyes on her, the attention that was never hers to begin with. They didn't know anything about her. They didn't know how hard she'd fought just to get here, to survive, to be more than just a scared, silent girl. But it didn't matter. They would never understand. "Do you even know how to talk, or are you too busy staring at your food like some sad little robot?" Carla's voice dripped with venom. She wasn't alone, her friends were with her, snickering and whispering behind their hands. Jade's grip tightened on her tray. She could feel the heat of their stares burning into her skin. She wanted to fight back, to say something, anything. But the fear of being judged, of becoming what she had feared most, kept her frozen. A sudden shove jolted her, and Jade's tray tipped over, spilling her lunch across the table. Her heart skipped. She felt the sting of humiliation, the same feeling that had haunted her for years. She didn't react. Not out of bravery, but out of sheer survival instinct. She had learned long ago that reacting, fighting back, only made things worse. Her father's voice echoed in her mind, telling her to never show weakness. "Show them you're strong, Jade. Don't let them see what they can break." Carla's laughter rang out again, louder this time. "What's wrong, freak? Scared to talk? Or do you just not know how to stand up for yourself?" The words were like knives, each one cutting deeper, slicing through the walls Jade had built around herself. The room felt smaller. Jade's chest tightened. She had been here before, bullied, humiliated. This was her life, her fate. She was the victim, the quiet girl who would never matter. The same girl who had been dismissed by every person who was supposed to care for her. The girl who could never stand up for herself without fearing the consequences. But there was something inside her, a part of her that had been buried under years of pain, that began to stir. It was the anger, the frustration, the feeling of being so small, so helpless, for so long. She had spent so much of her life hiding, pretending that she wasn't angry, pretending that it didn't hurt. But it did. It always had. "Don't you dare," the words escaped her lips before she could stop them. She didn't know where they came from. They were quiet, but they were there. And in that moment, something inside her shifted. The power she had buried for so long, a power she had learned to control, began to awaken. The years of training, of forced self-defense classes, of surviving the worst, all came flooding back. But she still couldn't move. She was frozen, caught between the fear of becoming the person she had spent her life avoiding and the knowledge that she couldn't just let this slide. Carla leaned in, mocking her. "What? You think you're tough? You think you can fight back?" Her words were more like a dare than a question. Jade's hands clenched into fists beneath the table. Her jaw tightened. She didn't know what was happening. This wasn't supposed to be her. She wasn't supposed to be the angry girl. She wasn't supposed to be like the people who had hurt her. But every part of her body, every fiber of her being, was telling her to get up, to show them, to stop letting people walk all over her. Her father's voice whispered in her ear again, but this time, it wasn't about survival. This time, it was about something different. If you can't defend yourself, you'll never be free. Jade took a breath, feeling the weight of it all. She had been weak for so long. But maybe, just maybe, it was time to be something else. She stood up. Carla stepped back, eyes widening as she finally realized Jade wasn't the girl she thought she was. But it was too late. Jade's hand shot out, her fingers wrapped around Carla's wrist in a way that sent a chill up her spine. The group fell silent, watching, stunned. Jade didn't let go. She wasn't sure why, but for the first time in a long time, she didn't want to. Jade's grip tightened on Carla's wrist, her heart pounding in her chest, but her mind was calm. Too calm. She felt the pulse of her anger, the raw edge of her emotions bubbling beneath the surface, but she didn't let it take over. Not yet. She had trained herself for moments like this, for the pressure, the danger. This wasn't about her past. It was about the present. It was about survival. But it was also about choice. This was the moment where she decided who she was going to be. Carla's eyes were wide with shock, her breath shallow, her usual confidence evaporating. Her friends hesitated, unsure of what to do. There had never been anyone who dared to push back, not like this. They had all assumed Jade was just another easy target, another quiet girl who would cower in fear. But they didn't know her. They didn't know the years of hell she'd lived through, the lessons her father had drilled into her, the brutal self-defense techniques that had kept her alive. "Let go of me," Carla snapped, jerking her wrist. Jade didn't respond. Her eyes were locked on Carla's, but she wasn't seeing the girl in front of her. She wasn't thinking about the bullies, or the humiliation, or the years of trauma. All she saw was the tension in Carla's body, the panic creeping into her voice. It was familiar. Too familiar. Jade's body reacted instinctively, twisting Carla's arm in a way that left the other girl wincing. The cafeteria was eerily quiet now, the laughter replaced by a tense stillness. Students stared at them, some whispering, others too stunned to speak. Jade felt the weight of every single eye on her, but she didn't let it break her focus. This wasn't for them. It wasn't about showing off. It was about showing herself something she'd almost forgotten. Her power. Her strength. "You think you're tough?" Carla's voice cracked. "You think this is funny?" Jade's gaze didn't waver. "No," she said softly, "but I think you've pushed me too far." She could feel the heat in her chest, the anger that was rising again, but this time, it was different. It was controlled. For the first time in her life, Jade wasn't reacting out of fear or rage. She was making a choice. She wasn't going to be the victim anymore. Carla's friends started to stir, stepping closer, murmuring among themselves. Some were smirking, probably thinking Jade was about to break under the pressure, that this was just a passing moment of defiance before she crumbled. But Jade knew better. She'd been through worse. Much worse. and if they wanted to push her, to challenge her, they were going to see what she was capable of. "Let her go, Jade," one of them called out, trying to sound authoritative but failing. They weren't used to this. They were used to controlling people, to making them feel small. But that wasn't going to happen today. Jade shook her head. "No. Not until you understand something." Carla's expression shifted from surprise to fury. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means I'm not going to let you push me around anymore," Jade replied, her voice firm. "And I'm not afraid of you." For a moment, Carla seemed to hesitate, as though she was processing what had just happened. But the confusion quickly turned into something darker, a smoldering anger that radiated from her. "You think you're better than us?" she spat, venom lacing her words. "You think you can just walk in here and take control?" Jade felt the tension rise, but she refused to give in. She was no longer the scared girl who had been conditioned to cower. She wasn't that person anymore. And the realization hit her like a wave: she had nothing to prove to them. She didn't need their approval, their validation. All she needed was to stand her ground. She loosened her grip on Carla's wrist, but didn't let go entirely. "No. I don't think I'm better than you," she said, her tone calm, almost detached. "But I'm not going to let you make me feel small either." Carla's eyes narrowed, and for a second, Jade thought she might escalate things. She could almost hear the gears turning in Carla's head, weighing whether to strike first or back down. The others were still watching, unsure whether to intervene or let their leader take control of the situation. "Is this what you want?" Carla's voice trembled slightly, but there was still arrogance in it. "To fight me in front of everyone? Do you think you'll win? You think this makes you strong?" Jade felt something shift inside her. She didn't want to fight. She didn't want to be like the people who had hurt her, people who used violence to control others. But she wasn't going to let Carla use her to make herself feel superior either. This wasn't about a fight. This was about drawing a line. About showing that Jade was no longer going to take it. "I don't need to fight you," Jade said, her voice steady. "I'm not here to prove anything to you or anyone else. But I'm also not going to let you walk over me." There was silence for a moment, a heavy weight hanging in the air. Jade could feel Carla's anger simmering, but she didn't flinch. She stood there, unmoving, eyes locked on Carla's. For once, she wasn't scared. She wasn't backing down. Then, with a sudden movement, Carla yanked her arm free, but the force of it made Jade step back. The tension broke in an instant, and the cafeteria buzzed with chatter again. But Jade didn't feel any relief. She wasn't looking for validation from the onlookers. She didn't need their approval. All she needed was to know that she could walk away from this with her head held high. Carla was glaring at her, a look of pure hate in her eyes. "You'll regret this," she said, her voice low and threatening. But Jade didn't respond. She didn't have to. Jade turned, walking away without looking back. It was done. The confrontation was over, and as she stepped out of the cafeteria, she felt something shift inside her. She had done it. She had stood up for herself, not out of rage, but out of a quiet strength she hadn't known she possessed. The girl who had once been afraid to speak up, the one who had spent her life hiding from the world, was finally learning to embrace her own power. And she wasn't going to let anyone take that away from her. But the battle wasn't over. She knew that. Carla would come after her again, and so would others. But Jade wasn't the same person she had been yesterday. She had drawn a line in the sand, and she wasn't going to let anyone cross it. The next few days were a blur of tension. Jade could feel the stares, the whispers, the judgment hanging in the air. It wasn't just Carla and her friends anymore. Everyone knew what had happened in the cafeteria. Jade had become a topic of conversation, and the weight of it all pressed heavily on her shoulders. She kept to herself, as usual, but there was a difference now. She didn't hide her eyes anymore. She didn't shrink into herself when someone glanced her way. She stood tall, shoulders squared, though inside, the storm was far from calm. The anger, the shame, the fear, they still swirled inside her. But there was something else too. Something new. The same bullies who had mocked her before kept their distance now. They still made the occasional snide remark when they thought she couldn't hear, but none dared to approach her. Not after what had happened. And while Jade didn't exactly relish the fear they now had of her, there was a strange kind of satisfaction in it. For once, she wasn't the one being controlled. For once, she wasn't the one cowering in the corner. Still, she didn't feel victorious. She didn't feel like a hero. Instead, she felt a gnawing emptiness, a sense that the fight wasn't over, that somehow, her power hadn't been fully unleashed. Every time she walked through the hallways, she saw the looks, the expectations, the assumption that she was somehow different now, that she had somehow won. But Jade wasn't convinced. The fight inside her was far from finished, and it wasn't about other people. It was about herself. Her mind kept going back to the moment in the cafeteria, when she had held Carla's wrist and stared into her eyes. The power had been there, undeniable. But what was it? Was it strength? Was it control? Or was it something more dangerous, something she didn't want to face? Jade had grown up with the harshest kind of training. Her father, a man who believed that survival was the only truth, had instilled in her a ruthlessness that she both hated and admired. He'd taught her how to defend herself, how to strike when necessary, how to be calm and calculating when the world was chaotic. But it hadn't been enough. She had needed more than just physical strength. She had needed something to control the fire inside her. The fire that, at times, felt like it would consume her. The violence she had been taught to carry with her, the quickness to fight, to stand firm, to never back down, was that really who she was? It had worked before, sure. It had kept her alive. But now, it felt like a prison, a shackle that kept her bound to her past. In the quiet of her room, Jade sat on the edge of her bed, staring at her reflection in the mirror. She had been running from who she was for so long, trying to bury the person her father had trained her to be. But now, she could see it, the war inside her, the pull between the brutal fighter she had been taught to be and the young girl she wanted to become. Could she control this? Could she suppress the anger that surged up whenever she was pushed? Or would she let it consume her like the people who had hurt her? The uncertainty gnawed at her, and she found herself staring at the picture on her nightstand, the one of her mother, a woman who had somehow found a way to survive the same world, yet had always tried to keep peace, to remain hopeful despite everything. It was the one thing Jade had held onto from her mother, the belief that peace could be found, even in the darkest places. But peace felt like a distant dream now. The next day at school, Jade was met with the same cold reception. Students whispered, casting furtive glances as she passed by. Carla's friends still looked at her like she was a ticking time bomb, ready to explode at any moment. But Jade ignored them. She was tired of the drama, tired of the games. The only thing that mattered was finding a way to manage this power inside her. This force that had once been a survival mechanism, but now felt more like a weapon she couldn't control. At lunch, she sat alone in a corner, away from the usual cliques and groups. She didn't mind the solitude. It gave her time to think, time to breathe. But then, unexpectedly, a girl from the class, Danny, someone Jade had never really spoken to before, sat down across from her. "Hey," Danny said, her voice tentative. "Mind if I sit here?" Jade looked up, momentarily surprised, but then nodded. She hadn't expected anyone to approach her, especially not after everything that had happened. "Yeah, sure." Danny hesitated, her eyes scanning Jade's face, as if trying to read her. "I don't think you're a bad person," she said quietly. I know what it's like to be pushed around." Jade stared at her, confused. "What are you talking about?" Danny leaned forward slightly, her voice lowering even more. "I've seen what they've been saying about you. You don't deserve that." Jade's lips tightened into a thin line. "You don't know anything about me. I know what it's like to be labeled. To be the other, the one people think they can walk all over because they don't understand you," Danny said, her voice steady. I know you didn't ask for any of this, but sometimes you have to stand up for yourself. It's not about fighting. It's about choosing who you want to be. Jade looked at her, really looked at her. There was something genuine in her eyes, something that made Jade feel like she wasn't alone in this world. For the first time, someone wasn't looking at her with fear or suspicion. They were looking at her with understanding. I've been trying to figure that out, Jade admitted, her voice quieter now, the tension of the past few days finally starting to break. I don't want to be like them. I don't want to be angry all the time. Danny nodded. You don't have to be. But you also don't have to let them define you. They don't get to choose who you are. Jade felt a flicker of something inside her, something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. Hope. It was small, almost fragile, but it was there. Maybe this wasn't just about controlling her anger. Maybe it was about finding a way to transform it, to use it for something better. She didn't have to fight the world. She could rise above it. The following week, things began to shift. Jade was starting to understand the complexity of the power she wielded. She no longer felt the constant urge to suppress it, but she wasn't sure if she was ready to let it flow freely either. Each day she woke up with a new understanding of herself, her feelings, her strength. It was as though she were slowly unraveling a puzzle she had been too afraid to solve before. And in some ways, it felt like everything was leading to this moment. Danny's words lingered in her mind. She didn't have to be angry all the time. She didn't have to be a victim of her circumstances. She could choose to rise above it all. And for the first time in a long while, Jade considered the possibility that maybe she didn't have to fight against the world. She could fight for herself. The next confrontation didn't happen when Jade expected it. She was on her way to the library, trying to find some peace between classes, when she was cornered by a familiar face, Carla. The bully who had started it all. The girl who had always been the source of her anxiety, her shame, her fear. But this time, something was different. Carla was alone, and her posture wasn't filled with the usual arrogance. Jade froze for a moment, instinctively bracing herself. But then, she realized that she wasn't scared. At least not in the same way. The anger wasn't boiling in her veins, ready to explode. There was something calmer now, more controlled. She had a choice in this moment, and for the first time, she didn't feel like she had to react immediately. Carla opened her mouth, but the words came out slower than Jade expected. I'm sorry, she said, her voice unsteady. I didn't mean it. Jade blinked, unsure if she had heard that correctly. For a moment, she just stood there, processing what had been said. Carla, the girl who had mocked her, who had tried to humiliate her, was apologizing? It took a few seconds for Jade to respond. She wasn't sure what to say. She had never been in a situation like this before. She had always reacted with violence, with rage, with the impulse to fight. But this was different. This was about something deeper, something that involved more than just physical dominance. It was about what she had learned over the past few days, about finding peace within herself. Why? Jade asked simply. Her voice was steady, calm, the same voice she had used when talking to Danny. The voice that had started to make sense of her feelings. Carla hesitated, looking almost vulnerable for the first time. I thought I could make myself feel better by making you feel bad. I don't know why I did it. She looked away, her face red with shame. I didn't know what else to do. You're different, and I didn't understand that. So I took it out on you. Jade's mind raced. She had never considered that before. The idea that Carla's cruelty had been a reflection of her own insecurities. It wasn't an excuse, but it was a perspective she hadn't had the chance to understand. The world wasn't black and white. People weren't just evil because they had chosen to be. There was always a story behind the actions. I get it, Jade said quietly. I do. But it doesn't make what you did okay. Carla nodded, as if she had already come to terms with that truth. I know. And I'm sorry. I don't expect you to forgive me. But I wanted you to know that. I'm trying to be better. I don't want to keep hurting people. Jade took a deep breath. She had every right to be angry, every right to lash out. But she had learned something valuable over the past week. That true power didn't come from holding on to anger. It came from letting go. From choosing not to let the past dictate her future. I'm not saying I'll forget what you did, Jade said, her voice firm but calm. But I'll accept your apology. Just don't expect me to pretend everything's fine. Carla nodded, clearly relieved. Thanks. I'll try to do better. The encounter left Jade feeling conflicted. There was no instant sense of victory, no overwhelming surge of satisfaction. In a way, the apology didn't fix anything. But it did something else. It shifted the dynamic. It showed Jade that sometimes, strength wasn't about fighting. It was about facing the truth and deciding how to move forward. The next few days passed without incident. Carla stayed out of Jade's way, and the other students seemed to lose interest in the drama that had surrounded her. Jade was left to her own thoughts, still grappling with the complexity of her feelings. She couldn't help but wonder if there would always be this conflict inside her. Would she ever be able to find complete peace, or would the anger always be there, lurking just beneath the surface? One afternoon, as Jade was walking to her last class of the day, she saw Danny again. This time, Danny wasn't sitting with her, but she waved at Jade from a distance. Jade's heart lifted just a little as she waved back. It wasn't much, but it felt like a connection, a reminder that she wasn't completely alone in this. Danny caught up with her later that day. "I'm proud of you," she said, smiling warmly. "You handled that whole thing with Carla better than anyone else could've." Jade shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. "I didn't really do anything." She apologized. "It's over." "I think it's more than that," Danny said. "You didn't let her define you. You didn't let the situation make you angry. You took control of your own story." Jade was quiet for a moment, reflecting on Danny's words. She realized that Danny was right. This wasn't about Carla. This wasn't about the bullies or the rumors or the fights. It was about Jade herself. She had taken control of her own life, her own future. She wasn't going to let anyone or anything dictate who she was. She had fought for herself, and in the process, she had learned that sometimes, the greatest strength came from not fighting at all. Jade smiled faintly. "Thanks." "You're welcome," Danny said, grinning. "Just keep doing what you're doing." For the first time in a long time, Jade felt a sense of peace settle over her. It wasn't the kind of peace that came from avoiding conflict, or from hiding away. It was the kind of peace that came from within, from accepting who she was and learning to let go of the things that didn't matter. The storm inside her wasn't gone, but it wasn't controlling her anymore. She had found her center, and that was enough. As the days continued to pass, Jade noticed something shifting in the air. Her classmates, once so eager to avoid her or mock her, were starting to act differently. They no longer saw the quiet, troubled girl as an easy target, but rather, someone who had survived, someone who wasn't going to let her past define her. They had seen a glimpse of the strength she possessed, and that was enough to make them take a step back. No one had tried to pick on her in days, not even Carla. But Jade knew that peace was fleeting. The world wasn't built on kindness, and there would always be someone, somewhere, waiting to test her. That was a reality she couldn't escape. But she also knew that she wasn't the same girl who had walked into this school just a few months ago. She had grown in ways she hadn't fully realized. She had learned control, something that seemed impossible before. She had learned to harness the strength that had once been a source of her rage. There was power in restraint, in choosing not to act on impulse, but to think. To choose your response, not just react. And for the first time in her life, Jade realized that strength didn't always have to be demonstrated in violence. But it wasn't just about control. It was about being who she truly was, without fear. She had walked into that school with her head down, hiding the scars of her past. But now, she held her head high. The whispers that once haunted her, the stares that once made her heart race, no longer had the power they once did. She was in control of herself. It was a strange feeling, empowering yet humbling. Jade wasn't sure what to do with it all. The person she had become was someone she hadn't expected to be. And yet, she liked who she was becoming. She was learning to forgive herself for the things she couldn't change. She was starting to realize that her story wasn't defined by the hurtful things that had been done to her, but by the way she chose to rise above them. One afternoon, as Jade walked home from school, she passed a group of girls sitting at a bench near the school gate. She recognized them. They were the popular girls, the ones who often made fun of her in the past, the ones who had whispered and snickered when she walked by. Jade felt a brief pang of discomfort, but this time, it didn't overwhelm her. It was just a small reminder of who she used to be, a fleeting shadow of the girl she had left behind. As she walked past them, one of the girls, Tina, called out to her. "Hey, Jade." Jade froze for a moment, surprised by the sudden attention. She hadn't expected anyone to speak to her, much less someone like Tina. She turned, her eyes narrowing slightly, not out of suspicion, but curiosity. Tina stood up, walking over to Jade. I just wanted to say I'm sorry for how I treated you," she said, her voice hesitant. "I didn't know what I was doing back then. I was just following everyone else, and I didn't stop to think about how it might have hurt you." Jade blinked, unsure of how to react. Tina, of all people, was apologizing? This wasn't the version of Tina she had known, the girl who had mocked her with the others. This Tina seemed softer, more aware of her actions. It was a stark contrast to the girl Jade remembered. "I never meant to make you feel like you didn't belong," Tina continued, looking genuinely remorseful. I was wrong." Jade felt a mix of emotions swirling inside her. She could have easily rejected the apology, let her anger rise to the surface. She could have told Tina to leave her alone. She could have relished in the moment, in the satisfaction of seeing someone who had once tormented her now begging for forgiveness. But instead, Jade did something that surprised herself. "I appreciate the apology," she said quietly, her voice calm and steady. "But just because you say sorry doesn't mean everything is okay. I don't forget what happened." Tina nodded, her expression accepting the truth of Jade's words. "I understand. I don't expect you to forgive me right away. I just wanted to take responsibility for it." For a moment, there was silence between them. It wasn't uncomfortable, though. Jade wasn't angry anymore. She wasn't even bitter. She was just at peace. "I'll take your apology," Jade said finally. "But that doesn't mean we're friends. And that's okay." Tina smiled, a small, genuine smile. "Yeah, that's fair. I just wanted you to know that I see you now. I see who you really are." Jade nodded, feeling something shift within her. It wasn't about forgiveness, not entirely. It was about understanding. Understanding that everyone had their own battles, their own flaws. Understanding that people could change, could grow, could recognize their mistake. It wasn't her job to carry around the weight of their actions. As Jade continued her walk home, she felt lighter than she had in a long time. The past wasn't gone, but it wasn't controlling her anymore. She was no longer defined by the pain she had endured, but by the strength she had gained from it. When Jade reached her house, she didn't go inside immediately. She stood for a moment on the steps, letting the quiet wash over her. It was late in the afternoon, and the sun was starting to set, casting a soft orange glow across the horizon. Jade took a deep breath, closing her eyes for a moment as the weight of the day lifted from her shoulders. She thought about all the things she had been through, the abuse, the bullying, the isolation. She thought about how far she had come. She had been broken, but she wasn't broken anymore. She was whole. And no matter what happened next, no matter what challenges life threw her way, Jade knew she was ready. Because strength wasn't about never falling, it was about how you got back up. Jade opened her eyes, looking out at the world before her. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't even close. But it didn't have to be. She had learned that true peace didn't come from avoiding conflict, but from facing it head-on, choosing your response, and not letting the past steal your future. She had become the person she was meant to be. And no one, no matter how hard they tried, could take that away from her. As the weeks went by, Jade began to notice that the atmosphere at school had shifted entirely. It wasn't just that people had stopped picking on her, it was the way she was treated now. The whispers that once followed her in the hallways had dwindled into quiet acknowledgement, an understanding that Jade was not someone to be underestimated. Her presence had begun to command respect, not through violence, but through the strength she had quietly cultivated over the years. She no longer felt like an outsider. The students who had once ridiculed her were now more cautious, more aware of who they were dealing with. Even the teachers seemed to have taken notice of her transformation. There was an air of subtle recognition whenever she walked into the classroom, something that told Jade that her story had spread beyond the confines of her small circle. It wasn't just that people had stopped bullying her. They had begun to see the quiet resilience that she carried, and they started to understand her power wasn't just physical. It was mental, emotional, and deeply rooted in who she was as a person. The transformation wasn't just about how she carried herself, it was about how others began to see her. The girl they once mocked now stood as a silent symbol of defiance, a reminder that not all wounds were visible. One afternoon, as Jade sat in the lunchroom, she noticed Carla sitting alone at a table by the window. The girl who had once made it her mission to break Jade had changed too. Carla's confident demeanor had been replaced by a visible vulnerability. She stared down at her phone, her fingers idly scrolling as she picked at the edge of her tray. Jade's instinct was to keep walking, to not get involved, to maintain the distance that had become her comfort zone. But there was something in Carla's posture, a heaviness in her shoulders, that stopped Jade. It reminded her of the girl she had once been, alone, searching for something she hadn't known how to find. Without thinking, Jade turned and approached the table, taking a seat across from Carla. The girl didn't look up at first, too caught up in her own thoughts to notice the quiet presence that had approached her. "Are you going to keep staring at that thing or actually talk to me?" Jade asked, her voice calm and steady. It was strange, the way the words came out, but there was no hesitation. She wasn't the same person who would shrink in silence. Not anymore. Carla looked up, startled by the directness in Jade's voice. For a moment, her expression flickered, surprise, confusion, then something else. Her eyes softened, and she let out a small sigh. "I don't know what to say to you," Carla admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Jade met her gaze, unwavering. "You don't have to say anything. I just thought I'd sit here." That's it. The simplicity of her words made Carla blink, as though she wasn't sure how to process them. I don't know why I'm like this. I always feel like I have to keep up with everyone, be the loudest, the toughest, but lately I've been feeling like I'm not really happy. I've been awful to you, Jade." Jade leaned back in her chair, her eyes softening as she listened. She didn't feel the rush of anger that had once bubbled up whenever someone like Carla tried to apologize. Instead, she felt something else, empathy. A quiet understanding of the pain that was driving Carla's behavior. It wasn't an excuse for the things she'd done, but it was a reason. And Jade had learned that sometimes understanding was the key to moving forward. "You've been awful, yeah," Jade said slowly, her tone steady. "But people make mistakes. And if you're really sorry, then you can do better. But that's on you." Carla nodded, her eyes brimming with something close to guilt. "I am sorry. I really am. I never understood how hard things must have been for you. I didn't get it." Jade studied her for a moment. "It's not about getting it. It's about growing up. And yeah, I've been through a lot, but I don't let it define me anymore. I choose not to." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The sounds of the lunchroom, the laughter, the chatter, seemed far away, as though the world had narrowed down to just the two of them. In that silence, Jade realized something important. This wasn't about making Carla feel better. It was about her own growth. She had been waiting for some kind of closure, some acknowledgement of the hurt she had endured, But the truth was, she didn't need it. She had moved on. The pain was no longer hers to carry. "You know, you're different," Carla said, breaking the silence. "You've changed, Jade. I see it. You're not the same girl I used to make fun of." Jade smiled, but it wasn't a smile of triumph. It was the kind of smile that came from acceptance. "I'm not the same girl because I stopped letting you control who I am. And I'm not going to let anyone do that anymore." Carla looked down at her hands, her expression conflicted. "I think I need to change too. I need to figure out who I really am, not who I think I'm supposed to be." Jade didn't respond immediately. She knew that this moment, this conversation, wasn't about offering advice or redemption. It was about understanding that Carla had her own journey to walk, just like Jade had hers. "I can't tell you how to do that," Jade said after a long pause. "But I can tell you that it's worth it. Taking the time to figure out who you are, without all the noise, without all the pressure. It's the only thing that really matters." The bell rang, signaling the end of lunch. Jade stood up slowly, not out of obligation, but because she knew this conversation was complete. "Good luck, Carla," Jade said simply, her voice warm but steady. "You don't have to do it alone." Carla gave her a small smile, a genuine one this time, and nodded. "Thanks, Jade. I'm gonna try. I really am." As Jade walked away from the table, she felt a shift inside her. She hadn't been expecting anything from Carla, no grand gestures or apologies. But there was something powerful about the moment. It wasn't about winning or losing. It wasn't about revenge or justice. It was about understanding that people, no matter how lost they might seem, had the potential to change. Jade's growth wasn't just her own anymore. It was a ripple effect. She had learned to forgive herself, and now, she could see the possibility for others to do the same. The road ahead wasn't easy, and it wasn't always clear. But Jade knew one thing for sure: she wasn't alone in it. And neither was anyone else. The final week of school approached, and Jade felt the weight of everything she had endured and overcome settling in her chest. The tension that had once wrapped itself around her like a vice was finally starting to loosen, but there was still the lingering uncertainty about the future. She had learned to stand tall in the face of adversity, to shoulder the pain of her past without letting it consume her, but she had also learned something equally important: the future wasn't defined by the mistakes of the past. It was what she chose to do with her strength, her resilience, and her heart that mattered most. But even as she faced the final stretch of the year, Jade knew the real test had nothing to do with grades, popularity, or the opinions of others. The real test was whether she could continue to carry her growth with her as she left this chapter behind. One afternoon, as she was gathering her things from her locker, a familiar voice called out to her. It was Carla, the girl who had once been her tormentor, now standing in front of her with a mixture of nervousness and determination on her face. "Jade," Carla said, hesitating as she reached out to her. I need to talk to you." Jade glanced up at her, her expression unreadable. She didn't speak right away. The last time they'd spoken had been a quiet, understanding moment between them, but Jade had made no promises. She had no expectations now. This was Carla's journey, just as Jade's was hers. "Okay," Jade said simply, closing her locker and turning to face the girl. "What's on your mind?" Carla took a deep breath, clearly struggling to find the right words. "I know I've messed up a lot," she began, her voice shaky. "And I know I hurt you. I don't expect forgiveness, but I wanted to say I'm sorry. Not just for what I did to you, but for what I've done to other people. I've always been afraid of being weak, of not fitting in, and I thought making other people feel small would make me feel bigger. But it didn't. It just made me feel more lost." Jade studied her quietly, hearing the vulnerability in Carla's voice. It wasn't the apology Jade had expected, and it wasn't the kind of thing she could easily forgive. But in that moment she realized forgiveness wasn't about excusing the past, it was about choosing not to let it define her. "I'm not asking you to forgive me, but I need to be better. I need to change. I can't keep going like this, Carla continued, her eyes wide with sincerity. I want to be better. Not just for you, for everyone. Jade was silent for a long moment, her mind racing. She remembered the girl who had taunted her relentlessly, the girl who had pushed her to the edge of what she thought she could handle. But she also remembered the girl who had sat at lunch with her, who had admitted her mistakes and had tried to change. There was something different about her now. Something real. You're right, Jade said finally, her voice steady but not unkind. You don't get to just erase the things you've done. But that doesn't mean you can't change. It doesn't mean you can't do better. Carla nodded, relief flooding her face as if the weight of her apology had lifted slightly. I'll try. I promise I will. Jade gave her a small, almost imperceptible nod, her eyes softening. You don't have to try for me, Carla. Try for yourself. You don't owe me anything. But you owe it to yourself to be better. With that, she turned and began walking toward the exit, feeling the weight of the conversation settle within her. She didn't need Carla's apology to move on. What mattered was that Jade had chosen not to be defined by the hurt and the anger. She had taken control of her own path, one where healing came from understanding, not resentment. As the school year came to a close, Jade stood at the threshold of something new. She had made peace with the parts of herself that had once been fragile and broken. The past, with all its scars and painful memories, had shaped her, but it no longer held dominion over her life. She had learned to forgive herself, to release the anger that had once consumed her. She had learned that true strength wasn't about suppressing the hurt, but about acknowledging it and choosing to rise above it. And she had learned to see the strength in others too. Carla's willingness to change, to admit her mistakes and try to do better, had opened something in Jade. The realization that people could grow, could change, could choose a better path. It gave her hope. Hope that no one was too far gone. No one was beyond redemption, not even herself. On the last day of school, Jade walked through the halls with her head held high, not because she was invincible, but because she had learned that it was okay to be vulnerable, to be human. She had been hurt, she had been broken, but she had never given up. And now, as the doors to the school swung open, signaling the end of the year, she stepped into the future with a quiet confidence. Her story wasn't finished. The road ahead would still be challenging, but she was no longer afraid. She had faced the darkness and emerged stronger, more resilient than ever. And in that strength, Jade had found something beautiful: peace. She had the power to shape her future, and she knew now that it would be one defined by compassion, understanding, and most importantly, her own sense of self-worth. She wasn't the same girl who had walked into the school months ago. She wasn't the girl who had been broken by others. She was someone new, someone unshakable, someone who had the power to create the life she wanted. And as she walked into the unknown, she carried with her the knowledge that no matter what the future held, she could face it with grace. She was free. And that was all she needed to know.